Welcome back. Gastric foreign bodies are common causes of persistent vomiting and anorexia in dogs and cats. Let's find out more about these and how to surgically address them. Gastric foreign bodies are the most common indication for gastrotomy in dogs and cats. Yes, that is a spoon. The dog ate a spoon. They can be anything, as you can see, and I mean anything. Bones, rocks, fabric, toys, light bulbs, I mean anything. They can be diagnosed through a detailed history taking on your end, clinical signs, which include persistent vomiting and inappetence, and of course, an abdominal x-ray as seen in these pictures. However, we don't want to immediately cut open a patient because it holds more risks as compared to a non-invasive retrieval method like endoscopy. Patient stabilization concerns are ultimately dependent on the exact cause of gastric disease. All right, let's take this exercise for your radio subject, I guess, but it is very, very relevant to our lesson. So this is a lateral radiograph, and can you guess what is contained in the stomach right there? Are those worms? Are those rubber bands? Or are those bones? What do you think? While you're thinking, I'm gonna point out some things. The bladder is full. You have gas distension in some parts of the intestine, and I think the kidneys here are rather small than usual. Anyway, so what are these? These are actually rubber bands. I hope you got it right. Well, we could only guess. I mean, I gave you a very narrow selection of choices, so no one should be sad if they didn't get it right. Of course, we will not be able to know what they are unless we open it up. Next, so can you see that? This one right here, what could that be? Is it a bone? A Christmas light bulb? Or is it a metal fragment? There are two ways of giving you a clue for this, but I hope you have your answers. Yeah, is it? It's letter B. Correct. Now, a bone, all right, would have the same radiopacity as the spine. So it's not as radiopaque as this one. And of course, a metal fragment would have a much higher radiopacity than the bone itself. So actually, the Christmas light bulb is the safe way to go, just by looking at how radiopaque this object is. Next, number 3. This one. All right. A lot of poop in this, in the colon and the rectum. Big spleen, expected when the stomach is distended. So what is this inside the stomach? Is it a towel? Are those rubber bands as well? Or is that a normal ingesta? Note, this x-ray is quite overexposed, so the contrast is quite high. But try to guess what is this. You have it? What do you think that is? It's actually a towel. It's a piece of fabric. As you can see, the duodenum on this side would have a small amount of gas. The remainder of the small intestine is normal in diameter, contains a normal amount of fluid and gas. And the colon, as I've said, it contains formed fecal material. Number 4. Is this a can fragment, a plastic, or is it a bone? You think? It's actually a can fragment. It's actually the, what do you call this? The tansan. The tansan in the, in the can. yung takip, the one we flip when we open up a can of soda. Yep, that's it. So a dog accidentally ate that, and since this is a big dog, so easy for them to eat that without any damage to the esophagus or even the oral cavity. So as you can see, the stomach is moderately distended with soft tissue opacity ingesta. Right here, you have this metallic opaque foreign object. As you can see, this is more radiopaque than the spine. So you could actually know that it's not a bone. So it would be a much denser material. And the remainder of the intestine is filled with fluid and gas and has a uniform diameter. Last one. This might be quite challenging, but you will be able to get it. Okay, so do you see where the foreign body is? It's actually this one here. Right here. Alright, so what could that be? It's an ovoid material. I think it's around 4 centimeters. It has a bit of a gas-filled center. So, what do you think that is? It's actually a walnut. Again, you have a choice of bone here. It's not as radiopaque as this one. It's not a plastic cap because it looks more of the radiopacity is more of the soft tissue. So I would guess it's an ingesta or a part of it. So the walnut is the smart choice for that. All right. So I hope you were able to, get your eyes trained in looking for those foreign bodies. It is challenging in your first try, but then if you know the normal radiographic anatomy, you're good to go. As we have discussed before, it is best to fast surgical patients at least 8 to 12 hours before surgery. But why do we fast our surgical patients? Why the need for it? Why do we need to withhold food and sometimes water to them before a surgery, especially an abdominal surgery? Think on that, all right? And then let me know about your answers. You could write it on the comment section of this video, or you could message me about it. Just let me know what you're talking about, okay? So the ideal is 8 to 12 hours. However, in pediatric patients, we usually fast them for only 4 to 6 hours to prevent hypoglycemia. Sometimes just to fast them and prevent hypoglycemia, we put them into a dextrose infusion, just so to prevent the complications of low blood glucose. In cases of gastric obstruction or distension, malpositioning, ulceration, if there's free fluid in the abdominal cavity when you ultrasound, when you did ultrasound on the patient, then no fasting is needed. You need to perform that surgery ASAP. So, point to ponder about: how do we know if there is an ulceration that led to perforation when we haven't opened the dog yet? I think I've said this a few seconds ago. Gastric contents would leak into the peritoneal cavity in cases of perforations. So that could lead to peritonitis, elevated inflammatory response all over the peritoneal cavity, and that would lead to free fluid accumulation within the peritoneal cavity. So electrolyte imbalances is also common for patients with foreign bodies since they are continually vomiting. Vomiting patients commonly suffer from dehydration and what? Is it a hyperkalemia or a hypokalemia in vomiting patients? I think this was touched on patho or currently being discussed. Vomiting patients. Is it hyperkalemia or hypokalemia? Low potassium, high potassium. Low potassium, yes. They suffer from hypokalemia. Hypokalemia is generally defined as a serum potassium level of less than 3.5 milliequivalent per liter, or a 3.5 millimole per liter if you want to do that kind of units. Gastric fluid actually has little potassium in it. So when they reason out that a patient is low in potassium because it's actually expelling the potassium in its vomitus, it's actually wrong because there's little potassium in the gastric fluid. It's only at around 10 milliequivalents per liter. However, this is how it happens. When a patient vomits, okay, its fluid volume decreases. That's why dehydration happens. And the body goes into a state of metabolic alkalosis. When metabolic alkalosis happens, the kidneys react by increasing the excretion of potassium. All right. When there is increased potassium excretion in the urine to maintain homeostasis, that is when your potassium suddenly goes down. Because of this, crystalloid fluids must be supplemented with potassium. Fluids with dextrose are also recommended for young animals with presenting hypoglycemia due to prolonged vomiting and anorexia. Antiemetic drugs like metoclopramide are actually avoided in GI foreign body cases. Why? Doc, it's vomiting. Give metoc. Diba? We abbreviate, we shorten metoclopramide into metoc in clinical setting. But why, doc? Why give? Why don't we give an antiemetic drug if the animal is vomiting? Well, one thing about metoclopramide is it's not just an antiemetic, it's a prokinetic. Right? Since it is a prokinetic, it will make the gastric contractions faster and stronger, and also the intestinal peristalsis. It will actually worsen the condition in case that the foreign body will get into the intestine and now cause an intestinal blockage. It instead of it being removed from the stomach, which is so much easier than removing a linear foreign body in the intestine, it now gets a lot trickier. And if the foreign body is linear, meaning it's a string, it's a yarn, it's a shoelace, that is a very, very bad condition for the intestine to have in its intraluminal space. Now, whenever a gastrointestinal lumen is entered, perioperative antibiotics are indicated. Intravenous administration of these agents are done preoperatively, but why intravenous? I always hear that we gave antibiotics subcutaneously, doc. We gave it orally, we gave it at home. Okay, why? Why is that not advised for gastrointestinal surgical patients? I grabbed this picture from the small animal surgery textbooks. As you can see, the recommended is all given intravenously. Why? This is one disadvantage of just talking to my laptop when I'm recording this, because I cannot actually hear your answers. So, well, that's a challenge. Anyway, why? Hydration will limit the absorption of antibiotics, right? Pharma 101. And these patients are usually dehydrated, which can lead to a longer onset of action of the medications that you give. We cannot wait. You need high blood levels of the antibiotic at the soonest possible time. That is why intravenous antibiotics are advised. This is also why fluid therapy is advised. Combinations of these antimicrobials are usually indicated. For example, it's not just ampicillin that you give, and it's not just cefazolin. It's usually a combination of the two different drug families. For example, cephalosporins and aminoglycosides, or cephalosporins and metronidazole. Remember, the microbial flora of the gastrointestinal system increases as we move caudally. So, how do we remove these foreign bodies? We're now ready. We did it in the anesthesia. We gave the antibiotic. We gave analgesia. So, what do we do next? Click on our next video to find out.